Welcome to the Foundations for Figma, our most in-depth Figma course for beginners. Today, we will learn how to practically use frames, constraints, and auto layout in your designs, along with tons of tips, tricks, and shortcuts. My name is Ansh Mehra and I teach students design and AI. This is lecture 2 of our 10 lecture series. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. Alright, welcome to lecture 2. Super excited to discuss this part because in episode number 1 we had covered the basics. So we understood what exactly is Figma, how is it useful as compared to other tools. But in lecture number 2 we will dig deeper into the practical aspects of why Figma is so powerful specifically for UI design. So if you're here for the first time, folks, this is a free course on learning Figma and we have uploaded a lot of more in-depth videos on our latest learning platform called learnuiux.in. Now we will cover a lot of things, but today we will only stick to frames and auto layout. You will see anywhere I'm hovering, you will always see the zoomed in icon, and then if you want to see the keys that I've pressed, you will see them on the top right corner right here. So you'll always see what all shortcuts am I using. So today's video is split into 3 modules. In module number 1, we will understand the difference between groups and frames and understand why frames are so powerful because of this concept called constraints that we had briefly touched in episode 1, but I want to go into the deeper aspects of how constraints are really useful. In module 2, we will learn auto layout and have a hands-on experience of how auto layout is useful and a lot of plugins that I regularly use. And then in module 3, we will do practical implementation and check out hands-on examples. So let's start with module number 1 as to what exactly is the difference between groups and frames. Now, you would have obviously seen that when I select something which is inside a frame, let's say I take this thing right here, if I cross this out, or let's say I take this auto layout right here, you will find the constraints panel that looks like this. Okay, and in our last video I told you to just completely ignore this shape right here and understand that we have horizontal and vertical constraints. Now the question is, when do we use horizontal and when do we use vertical? And if you already know the basics, I would recommend you to shift directly to module 2 where we do auto layout. But let's understand horizontal constraints. So folks, horizontal constraints define how a layer behaves if it is inside a frame and if I stretch the frame along the x-axis. For example, if I press F and create a frame like this and then create a rectangle like this and keep it in the center, let's make this red. If I keep it this way and select this thing right here, if my horizontal constraint is center, if I stretch the frame on the x-axis, it will always stay in the center. Now if I take this again and go from center to just say left, then this part, the left side of my red rectangle, will be tied to the left part of my frame. So if I stretch the left side, it follows the left wall. But on the contrary, if I stretch the right wall, nothing happens. Similarly, if I move the horizontal constraint from left to right, now my right wall of this red shape is going to follow the right wall of my frame. So now this time, completely opposite is happening of what was happening before. Now, what if I keep this in the center and I want this to stretch on all sides, left and right? In that way, I will select left and right, and now no matter what direction I stretch in, whether I stretch in from the right side or from the left side, it just follows, right? So these ones are pretty simple, right? Left maintains the layer's position relative to the left side, and then right and left to right and center. It is scale that confuses a lot of people because people keep asking me that, Ansh, what is the difference between scale and left and right? So let me show you 2 things right here. Okay, I will make a duplicate of this. Take this thing right here, keep the horizontal constraint to left and right. Take this one and make it scale. Now I will be using a new feature of Figma that we haven't covered yet, and it's called components. And it's very easy to understand. We'll have a separate lecture on how do we use components, but just assume right now that if I take this thing and rename this as L and R, and I will take this thing and call this as scale. Okay. Now I can select this one, click on this diamond icon and create a component. So you see this diamond icon right here. This means that this entire frame was essentially a normal layer, but now it has become a component. Now, what do I mean by that? I will explain, don't worry. But let me create a component of the scale as well. Now, if I hold this component and hold the Option key or the Alt key, I can make a copy out of it. But this is not an ordinary copy. This copy is called an instance inside Figma. Now, you'll be like, Ansh, you are introducing complicated words back to back. Can you tell us what exactly does this mean? So folks, the thing is that in my layers panel, you will realize that you can see the diamond icon right here. It's called LNR. And on the very top, you have a hollow diamond icon, which is also called LNR, but the icon is different. This is my instance right here. If I go make a change in my component, instead of red, if I make it blue, all of my changes done inside the component are reflected in my instance. So basically, no matter how many instances I make, let's just say I make unlimited instances, okay? Whatever change I make here will be reflected to the instances. So the component is like a parent and instances are children. And whatever changes you do on the component, you can actually reflect all of them into your instances. Now, of course, we will dig deeper into the upcoming lectures as to what all things can you do. But for now, let's just assume that all of your instances blindly follow your components. Now, why would I do that? Just to show you this one single example, that in my component, I will keep the width like this. But in my instance, I will stretch it this way. Okay. Then I will take this one right here. And notice now my red one, the horizontal constraint is at scale. And I will take this width and scale it again. Now let's scale it even more to see the significant difference. Now can you see the difference between what happened when I had chosen left and right and when I had chosen scale? So technically this is also scale. If I were to select this thing right here, you would see that this is scale. I can't change any constraints. So turns out in an instance, you cannot change any constraints. You can only do these declarations in the component, but you can see that something is happening, which is very, very different. Now let's read the definition of scale written by Figma Help. It said scale will define the layer's size and position as a percentage of the frame's dimension. It will then maintain those proportions as you resize them. Very complicated. Let's read the example. The frame's width is 100 pixel, and if the layer's width is 70 pixel, it means that the layer width takes 70% of the parent frame, correct? Now, if I resize the frame to 200 pixel, Figma will resize the layer to the width of 140 pixels, which is 70% of the parent frame. In this case right here, it doesn't care in percentages. It has absolutely defined that there is an exact distance on my left side. There's this exact distance on my right side. And then it is just maintaining that when I choose from left to right. But in terms of scale, this distance is varied. Let's assume that my width is X, okay? And I go from X to maybe 2X. So this is a complete 100% change, right? It has doubled up. So my middle thing, this shape right here, this will not care about what is the distance on left and right. It will only care that if I'm inside, let's just say the width of my inner container is Y, this will also go double. Why? Because it is thinking in terms of percentages. And once you use this in your practical day-to-day applications, you will understand how this is working out. So once we have done horizontal constraint, obviously now you'll have vertical constraints as well. And the principles remain the same. Okay. So in this case, if I were to create a taller frame, and let's just say I create a red button right here, and we had taken the example of a fab button, right? FAB, which is the floating action button. And let's say I have a nav bar on the top. Okay. And let me make this green. By the way, in Figma, you have Google fonts by default, and you also have X11 colors by default. So if you type in that color name, there is a certain list of X11 colors. If you put that, then you don't have to specify the hex code. I will create this component again, create an instance, and then if I stretch it, by default, nothing happens, right? But if I take this thing right here and choose the vertical constraint to be bottom, now this sort of follows, but now you can see that it's not following on the horizontal constraint. So I will take this one, make this left and right, take this one and make this right, not left and right. Imagine if I had made this into left and right, it would have stretched, but I don't want that. I want this to be pinned to the right side. So the question is, why do you need frames in the first place? You remember I said that you can also create a group. So let's just say I create a rectangle. So I will have a frame right here, and instead of a frame, let's create a rectangle. Okay. And let them have the same color. Now I will create a circular thing right here. I will create a circular thing right here. Now if I select both of them and do Command G, they're in a group. But if I select any child inside a group, you will realize that you have no option to add constraints. It is only inside a frame that you will see this column, and that is why frames are extremely powerful, simply because they have constraints inside of them. So just as an example right here, we have the iOS screen. This is the settings screen. And in the layers panel, you can see that this one is a frame. This checkbox tells you that this is a frame. And on the right side, you have the same thing, but this dotted square, this tells you that we have a group. So on the right side, we have the group. Let me write the group right here. That's a terrible G, but yeah, group. And this is my frame. Now, of course, you have constraints ready, right? If I were to take these things out and let's just say I were to stretch them, okay? I will take this entire thing and stretch it. So you'd realize that the constraints are following this pretty well. It is absolutely responsive. But if I were to stretch this group, you would realize that some things are getting messed up. Of course, it is following to some extent because the stuff which is inside the frame is working pretty well too, because if I were to go inside this group, you'd realize that these are all auto layouts, right? Now, what is auto layout? Auto layout is just level 2 of frames. But in most cases, when you stretch something in a group, things don't respond because the children inside a group are unaware. Like they have absolutely no tension about what my parent is doing in terms of like shapes and structuring. Also in frames, you have this thing called as clip content. Whereas in group, you don't have a concept of clip content. So a group will show you everything which is inside a group as compared to a frame where you can hide things. Now, a very cool shortcut is that if you hold the command key and then make some changes to your frames, you'd realize that the children no longer follow the constraint rule. So this is how you bypass constraints. So basically, if this was a group, if I had no constraints inside my children, this is how it would have responded without any constraints, which is terrible, right? Now, what you can do is you can literally go to Figma community and search for Joey Banks. And from Joey Banks, I got this file, right? So he has created these iOS systems and you can actually try these things out as to what all constraints they have set, because the best way to learn constraints is from seeing design files that are well prepared. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Let's just say I take this one single instance out. Okay. If I were to select this thing right here, and you can see that this is a hollow diamond, which means that this is an instance. I can actually detach this by selecting Option Command B. Once I do that, you'd realize that these are some 3 random lines, and this is basically an auto layout. And don't worry, you will learn auto layout, but let's assume that auto layout is level 2 of frames. I can obviously select this minus sign and convert this into a normal frame. So now you can see this frame button right here. This has essentially become a frame, and you can go between frame and groups very easily from here as well. Now, if I were to stretch this, you will realize that nothing is happening, right? And you can also see that, the elements are just dead now. I think they're following the left constraints, but if I were to move this left and right, nothing is happening. Okay. Now, the fun part is that I can select any of these things. Let's just say I take this content right here. Okay. And let's just create a new frame right again, because I think that'll be easier for you. I will take this airplane mode. Okay. I will select on this icon right here so that my width is uniform. Take this thing right here, bring these two together, align them and keep them here. And let's just have them stuck on the left side. Then you have a toggle, and I'll keep this here. Now I will delete this reference and just keep this frame right here. Okay. And I will make a component out of it. Now I will make a duplicate out of it just to see if the constraints are working or not. So there are no constraints right here. Okay. If I take this toggle and make this from left to right on the horizontal axis, see, now it's working well. Now, if I were to stretch this vertically. Maybe I want them to be in the center. So I can take all of them, go to my vertical constraints and go center. Okay, so this way I know that no matter what direction you stretch me in, it will always and always work. Okay, now this is a single level of constraint. You had a frame and then you've just put children inside that and then they're, sort of following your rules. But you can also have nested constraints. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's assume that I create a nav bar. Okay, and I'm going to create like a very, very bad looking prototype, but this is just to like prove a point. And let me just take this thing right here. Let me make this as slightly green. Let's just have some border area, otherwise it looks very, very bad. And let's assume that you have three things right here that looks like this. Okay. And then you have some icons in the center. Let's assume that it's like a replication of what the Figma navbar is doing. Okay. So what I've taught you right now is that you can take these things, let's tidy them up and you can make them left. These two can remain in the center and these ones can remain on the right side. So if I make a component, you have these things right here and then these are working pretty well. Okay. Now this navbar will come inside a screen, correct? So if I press F and select say MacBook Air, this navbar essentially comes right here, right? And then you can sort of put them together. And then what I can do is I can take the background of this frame and make this gray. Okay. Now this navbar is actually a child of the MacBook Air frame. So I have to set constraints to this navbar as well. So right now, if I were to create a component of this MacBook Air, okay, and then give an instance out of this like this. And if I stretch it, you'd realize that it's not responsive at all. Why? Because in my component, if I were to select my navbar, I haven't added any constraints. So I will again go from left to left and right and see now it is working. So essentially, notice what is happening. I have set constraints to the atomic level inside the navbar. Then once I started using this navbar in a bigger screen, I had to add constraints to the entire navbar itself. So there are two levels of constraints. One is on this level, which are constraints that are respecting the MacBook Air frame. But then even within the component, even within the navbar, you have constraints on these small objects. This is called nested framing. And within nested framing, you have nested constraints. That is that you can keep adding frames in one another, and then you can keep adding constraints without much issue. Now I have quite a few examples right here just to show you how people use frames, right? So people use this in their input fields. They use this in the settings value, and these are all like iOS examples. But there's one very, very important thing that you need to take care of. If I duplicate this alert icon right here, you would again see the word Autolayout. And I'll tell you why are you seeing this again and again. Let me first detach it, because if I don't detach it, I can't make any physical changes to the instance. So if you have to make any physical changes to the instances, you have to detach it. So once I have detached it, let me just get rid of auto layout because we haven't covered that yet. I will delete all the auto layouts and I'll tell you the problem statement. So let's just say this is a single line error. Would you want this component to work in this way? Or technically, if the alert is very, very small, if this is a single line thing, you want the height to shrink, right? So right now, what have we learned in frames and constraints? That the children adapt when the parent changes, correct? Using auto layout, the parent changes if the children change. I'll explain it again. In my frames example, I said that if I am shifting the parent, then the inner children are morphing. But in this case right here, I am not changing the outer boundary. I am actually adding more sentences. And because the children are modifying themselves, because the children are expanding, the parent container, which is the alert box, it is trying to accommodate all of these inner changes. Now, this accommodation of internal elements is not possible with constraints, because constraints are actually properties of children, right? The child knows that, okay, I have to be left, I have to be right, but there is no constraint for the parent container. So how do you educate the parent container? How do you tell the parent that this is how you need to expand if your children expand? And that is where we will learn auto layout. So these are some examples. By the way, we have uploaded all of these Figma files on the Figma community as well. For all episodes, you will have all the links in description. So you can obviously try these out, right? But before we enter auto layout, I want to introduce you to the concept of responsive design versus adaptive design, because understanding this key difference is very, very crucial before you start using auto layout and frames. So folks, responsive design is a word that is very commonly thrown around, right? And to make this more practical, let's open my website. So folks, this is my website right here, and let us see how this website responds as I shrink it from left to right. Okay, so I'm shrinking the entire canvas and nothing has happened yet. But as soon as I reach the ceiling, can you see how the divs are sort of moving and shrinking in size? Can you see what's happening? So the question is that if I were to take this on a very, very granular level, let's just say I completely shrink it to this level, you'd realize that all the elements are rearranging themselves to accommodate themselves in the limited space that they have. So essentially the text, the content, it is all the same. It is not like some stuff has gone away, but it is just making space so that all of these things are visible. Okay. If I were to go to say learnuiux.in, right, which is our free website to learn UX design. If I were to shrink this, you'd realize that the entire UI has changed and some elements have actually disappeared. So if I were to bring this back to a desktop length, you'll see all of these play icons. But once I shrink it beyond a specific limit, the UI icons have disappeared. This is not just responsive design. This is called adaptive design. Now let's come back to our slides. In responsive design, these are the screenshots right here that I've kept from my own website. So in this case, you will realize that you are essentially loading the same website on all devices, whether you open it on my phone or on the desktop, and it's sort of resizing according to the viewport. So the number of UI elements are the same. If I were to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 elements on the web, 6 elements on the mobile, but it's just that on the mobile, it might be of a different size. Now, if you make a change on the desktop app, it is reflected on the mobile app as well, because they're essentially the same component. The same component is just being resized or reframed or repositioned. But the thing is, at some point when you have complicated products, you can't have everything that is visible on the web come up on the mobile. And vice versa, because mobile has a small screen, you don't really have enough things to fill up on a desktop screen. Imagine if you were to take your Instagram app and see it on your desktop and not add anything. You will have so much of empty space on your desktop. So you would just end up wasting a lot of valuable real estate simply because you don't know how to fill up space. So the thing is that when we talk about real products, not about landing pages, but when we talk about real products need to have adaptive design. Now, when it comes to responsive design, of course, you can't have every element on smaller design, and it takes more time to load because all components are expected to be there, whether it's desktop or for mobile. But technically, when we look at adaptive design, so inside adaptive design, I've kept a screenshot of my Twitter. So this is my web version of Twitter. This is twitter.com on my phone's Google Chrome, and this is the Twitter app. Now, all of these are very, very different. This is opened on my desktop using Google Chrome, and you can obviously see that there are a lot of extra things. Okay, you have this column right here, you have the middle column, you might like, what's happening, so many things. But when I go to my Google Chrome on my phone, a lot of things change. They've cut away all the clutter and they've only kept the middle part, and they've sort of reduced the font size, reduced the buttons, like a lot of things have changed. This is the example of adaptive and not just responsive. Now, when we go from the Chrome mobile app to the actual native app, then you have more features. Now, why is that? Because when you use something on your Google Chrome on your phone, there's an assumption that you have slow internet and you have to load everything, right? You have to literally download every single thing every time you open the app. But here in my native app, I have already downloaded Twitter, which means that I already have at least 70 to 80 MB of Twitter's UI inbuilt in my app. When that happens, I can have a lot more flexibility. I can have a lot of code because now my phone doesn't need to download all of that code again and again. So when we talk about adaptive design, the core principle is that you can afford to lose some features on mobile. And most landing pages stick to responsive design, but when it comes to real products, they also follow adaptive design. And obviously this loads faster because it only downloads what is required. Imagine if your phone mobile data had to download all of these extra information, it would obviously consume more data, but it would also take a lot more time. So you need to understand the difference between a desktop web app, a mobile web app. So a desktop web app is very, very different. It is something that you open on Google Chrome as compared to an app like Figma or Photoshop or Adobe After Effects. You have to download these apps and install them. Those are your native desktop apps. So you have desktop native, you have desktop web. Then in terms of mobile also, you have a web app which opens on your Google Chrome or your Safari. And then you also have the native mobile apps that you download. And when you build your design system, you need to declare these components separately. So a component library for desktop web app is different. For mobile web app, it's completely different. People have this assumption that I can simply just, sort of add constraints and I will have one library that satisfies all the products. It doesn't work that way. Because even within Twitter, my desktop can be this wide, or even this narrow. So of course, you need responsiveness within a specific web app as well. But once you go from one device to another device, then it's about adaptiveness. So just to conclude, when you're making components for, say, your Chrome app, which opens on your Google Chrome on your desktop, then all of your components will need to have your constraints because now you're in a specific app. But if you're saying that, hey, now I'm also creating a version which opens on my mobile phone, then responsiveness or constraints alone will not work out. You need to create different components altogether. And how do you do that? There's a different concept called variants. So you have one variant for web, one variant for mobile, and we will cover that in the upcoming lectures. But I'm just trying to set the base as to what all techniques do you need to use inside Figma. So constraints satisfy your needs for responsiveness. But when it comes to adaptive design, you need to learn variants and components, which we will learn eventually. So when it comes to responsive versus adaptive UI, within a device range, let's just say you go from an old laptop to a big laptop to a MacBook Pro, responsiveness will help you. So constraints will stretch. But when you shift from a device, it is you learning how to make it adaptive. Now alone, your frames alone will always help you with your responsiveness, but components help you with your adaptiveness. Now there are 3 very, very important articles that I want you folks to read because I personally feel that if somebody has already explained these things in an amazing way, then you don't need me to explain them. So these are the 3 articles that you will have to read. The first one is on Medium, and I think this is a paid Medium article. So you might have to purchase, or sometimes Medium gives you free articles every day. Then this is a free article completely on designsystems.com called Space, Grids and Layouts by Elliot Dahl. And then there's another Medium article called Everything You Need to Know as a UI Designer about Spacing and Layout Grids. Now, I am not covering layout grids specifically because I learned everything from these articles and it's very difficult to sort of cover everything in 10 lectures. So I've made sure that, I can obviously guide you to resources that can fill in the gaps for you. Now we finally come to module 2 where we understand the basics of auto layout. Now let's understand what exactly is auto layout. Okay. And to understand the use case, let's assume that I want to make a button. Now, how would I make a button? I would probably make a frame. Okay. And let's make this in blue and let's add a button that says click me. Okay. Now I can of course narrow the width right here, make this rounded edges, and you have your button right here. And let's make this into a component. Now you would obviously know that if I'm making a button, of course the button might look different, but you can always have it for different purposes, right? You can have it for click me, you can have it for delete, you can also have it for buy now. And if you have something which is way more verbose, you can probably say something like create an account. Now the restriction with component and instances is that I can't change a lot of these things automatically, right? So I would probably have to go to every instance and then sort of, change these widths one by one. To show that create an account is there, I would probably have to extend the width like this. Of course, my constraints are not there, so I should probably make this into center. But even then, things are not working well. And I would have to probably extend the width again and again. Similarly, if we go back to our alert example right here, I would literally have to shrink the width manually for every single instance like this. So I want my parent to understand that the children inside need more space. This is where auto layout comes into the picture. Now I will make a duplicate of this. Let's make this red right here. Let me detach it. Let me take this frame and press Shift A. Okay. As soon as I do that, you would have noticed that there's some change that happened right here. Now this is the auto layout window. Now let me explain you what has happened. Now how do I know that this is an auto layout? Because in my layers panel, I can see these 3 lines. Okay. I will make this into a component and this time make instances again. Now see what happens. It is actually following my text width. So if I say create an account, I can type as much as I want and it will accommodate according to all the content which is inside my entire auto layout. So it sort of knows that all the content inside of me needs more space. So I have to make more space for it, right? Now, if I were to go here and let's go put an icon right here. If I were to scale this, can you see how the boundaries are sort of adjusting? Let's make this white so that it's less jarring to the eyes. But this is extremely useful, especially for buttons, right? Now let's take an example right here. So this is from an open source UI library called Untitled UI, and it is available on the Figma community. If I were to copy this sentence and paste this again and again, can you see how the entire thing is accommodating? This would not have been possible if I was using frames, because frames don't care about what is happening on the inside. So let's understand all of the options that auto layout gives us. Okay, and we'll cover all of these icons one by one. We'll take it super slow. Okay, I will delete this and I will get this frame right here. Okay, now you would notice that I took out my instance. So I can't make any changes to the auto layout. So if I really want to make any modifications, any physical level modifications, I will have to detach it. So I just detached it using Option Command B. And for example, if I'm clicking any shortcut, if you don't know what I'm clicking, you will always see it right here. So the first 2 icons are to decide the axis at which you are creating your auto layout. So right now I have an icon and a text. By default, it has created a horizontal layout. If I were to select this icon right here, it will create a vertical layout, which means that if I duplicate these things, all of these things are stacked vertically. Why? Because I have created a vertical auto layout. If I select this, I will come back to a horizontal layout. Now there's also one more thing called wrap. Now what does that mean? If I select on wrap, you would realize that if I duplicate, let's say I take this entire thing, let me duplicate, the behavior is almost the same. Okay, if I select this thing right here, the wrap is unselected. Okay, let's click on wrap again and let's try to extend the width. Things are in the center. Then why exactly do we need wrap? Now if I shrink the width, see what is happening. Things are essentially sort of fitting in between the constraints that I am setting on the outside. But wait, Ansh, what happens if we click back on this? It again shrinks to an horizontal layout, and because I had shrunk the width, things are getting cropped out. Okay. Now you'd be like, Ansh, this is so complicated. I thought we would simply get that long range of click me when you selected horizontal layout. Why it has just suddenly cropped? Turns out that when you select any of these 3 layouts, there's one more setting that you need to be careful of. And they're not in this auto layout panel. They're actually on the top right here. So can you see this thing? This is actually for my width. Let's say I delete this entire thing. Okay. And let's make a copy of it again. Can you see this width has now become something which is called as hug? If I click on this down arrow, you'll have 2 options. One is fixed width, one is hug contents. What does that mean? Hug content means, let me detach this. Hug content means that as I duplicate, it will make sure that it hugs all the content and nothing is cropped. But if I were to click on fixed width, now my width is fixed. So even if I duplicate, nothing will happen. So you will be like, Ansh, why exactly do we need a fixed auto layout? This is essentially acting as a frame, right? If you really think about it. Yes, but it is acting like a frame in a specific axis. If I were to literally convert this into a vertical auto layout, can you see how my width is still fixed, but I still have the other superpowers of my auto layout on the vertical axis? So moving forward, when we make components, you will realize as to why is this even useful. But think about it. Look at this screen right here. And this is very, very similar to a Twitter feed or a Facebook feed. All of these components, do you realize the fact that the width has to be fixed? If you're making it for the iPhone, this width can't be more than this, right? No matter what text you add, it has to be fixed. But you still need the superpowers of auto layout from a vertical layout perspective. So if I add a tall image, you want the height to extend, but you don't want the width to be extending. So in that case, you always have an option to actually fix any of these axes. Now, if I fix my height and if I fix my width, then this is essentially a frame. Then it's literally not useful to you at all. Then this is literally acting like a frame. But then what is the benefit? Why can't I just detach this and, simply have a frame with constraints? Because there are more benefits to using auto layout and we haven't covered those yet. So let's come back to our basics. We understood that there are three layouts. There's vertical, there is horizontal, and then there's wrap. And then if I were to extend this thing right here, you have this grid, okay? By default, it is in the center. But if I click on align top center, then click me goes on top. Similarly, you can align it to any corner you want. Now the fun part is that you will have this one more option that says horizontal gap in between items. Now it says horizontal gap because I've chosen horizontal layout. So if I were to increase this gap right here, can you notice how there's more space in the middle? But you would be wondering, why is the auto layout width not expanding? Because I have selected fixed here. If I were to go here and click on hug content, and as I extend my width, you'd realize that the container will also change its size. Now, if I select a vertical layout, this entire icon will change to vertical spacing. If I had multiple click me's, and if I go to my frame and I switch from a fixed vertical height to a hug content height, now I can see everything. And as I scale, you'll see that it is accommodating. And I can also take it to a level where I can make it into negative spacing as well. And this is very, very useful when you're creating a stack of DPs. Let's bring it back to 0. Now there's one more thing which is called as horizontal padding and vertical padding. Now let's understand what does that mean. Let's take this button again and let's assume that I'm not making a button, but I'm making a tag, like a small label sort of a thing. And what is a label? If I were to show you a quick example, right here, this limited time only, this is not a button. This is actually a label. So in that case, I need very thin padding, right? I need it to be responsive. I need it to be like real and, accommodating, but I want it to be thin. So you can actually select the vertical and bottom padding in one single shot. So if I were to say, make this 12 pixels, the padding here is just 12 pixels. So how do I see this padding? I can hold the option key and click anywhere on the boundaries and it will tell me the spacing. I can go here and make this also 12. But now you would be wondering that, Ansh, you are changing the left and right padding altogether. What if we want to change the padding individually? So you click on this button right here and you will have all the individual paddings one by one. So you can just change the left padding, you can just change the bottom padding, and you can do these things individually as well. What if you want to do it equally on all four sides? If you hold the option key and just click on this icon right here, then you see this icon right here, it says all padding. And right now it is saying 12, 12, 68, 52. Why is that? There's a specific logic behind this numbering. 12, 12, 68, 52 basically means that this is 12 on top left, this is 12, this is 68, and this is 52. So these numbers are basically arranged in a clockwise manner. If I take all of them and simply make this 12, then all the padding becomes equal. But sometimes, because you have a lot of line height, in most cases, you need to add extra padding on the left to make it visually equal. So here I've made this into 24 and my vertical and bottom padding is 12 pixel. So, obviously, if I were to take a quick example from the iOS design system, if I go here and take this one right here, you would realize that this is a mailbox and all of these items are in an auto layout. Now, why do they need to be an auto layout? If I delete any of these emails, I want the rest to simply come on the top. Let's say I delete all of them. I need all of them to stack amongst each other, right? Now imagine if this wasn't an auto layout. Let's take this threads and let's delete this auto layout. If I were to delete any of these, you would see empty space. Actually, let me delete these two. This is the kind of behavior that you will get. So in this case right here, I would ideally want all of these emails to just jump back to the top because they need to be in a row. But because there's no auto layout, there's nothing that the parent knows. So I can take this thread, and if I were to press Shift A again, it will again become an auto layout, and then I can increase the spacing in between them. I can also make it extremely negative as well. Now I will be putting up this Figma file in my community as well. If you go to Figma community and search for Ansh Mehra, you will be able to access this. But I would strongly recommend you to sort of practice, right? Because let's say this message bubble, this is also an auto layout because you can extend it to whatever height you want. But see this. If I were to select this message bubble right here, this is an auto layout, then there's another auto layout inside of it, then there's another auto layout for the bubble, and this is where we understand the entire concept of nested auto layouts. Just how we did nested constraints, here these people are doing nested auto layouts. Now you would be saying that, Ansh, this entire hello is such a small letter, and we check out the bubble auto layout, this says hug contents, then why is this not hugging to hello? What is this extra space for? This happens when you have selected this icon right here. If I were to make it as to auto width, then my text width would shrink and then the bubble, the entire boundary would wrap around. So these are small things that you can take care of, right? And if you were to look at, say, keyboard, right? This is a very, very important example. A keyboard is extremely responsive. But if I were to go inside my keyboard, you will realize that inside my buttons right here, these are all frames. They haven't made this into an auto layout. Now, why is that? Because nobody would ever delete F, right? They would never ever delete F. They know that this is a QWERTY keypad and this has to be in frames. That is why they're not using auto layout. So you need to be very, very smart in understanding when do I use auto layout and when do I use frame. And the basic logic behind this is that if you feel that the inner contents will change in width or in height and they will regularly change, then you should use an auto layout. But if you feel that there's going to be some rigidity to it, they're going to be static, or the elements are not going to change themselves in terms of physical dimensions or in terms of number, in that case, it has to be a very, very basic frame. So before we move to module 3, I have 3 frames in front of me, okay? So assume that I am creating a website where I am selling courses, okay? And I want to create the mobile version of it, app version of it, and the desktop version for it, okay? And let me just show you how the constraints look like, okay? Now this is technically an incorrect design, by the way, because if this was a native app, you would obviously have a bottom bar. And if this was open on Google Chrome, then you'll have a top bar. But, just for the sake of discussion, assume that this is a native app. Okay. And I'll make this into a component and I will stretch this so that you can just see how the app sort of responds. Okay. So an iPhone can either be this much tall, the width can sort of expand. So you can see that all of these things are sort of working out together. Now, how have I achieved this? Let's take all of these elements one by one. Let's revise all of the constraints. Okay. This thing right here, this is an info box. Okay. Now this info box itself is also a frame, and within the frame, all the elements inside are in auto layout. Now, why are they in auto layout? Because I might want to have a single line thing or a double line thing, but you can notice that all of these things are not getting responsive. Why? because technically I should have taken this heading. Let's delete all of these things and then taken this auto layout and this and then put them together in auto layout as well. So that if I were to duplicate, it would have been very, very responsive. Now, this is nested framing because I've added constraints to this. And then on top of that, this entire info box has its own left and right constraint. So everything inside of it is in the center. But when I talk about info box, it is at left and right. Then we look at the promo button right here. Now, I don't necessarily want the promo button to stretch to left and right. So I will keep it at center. I don't want even the middle image to go, scale itself. So I would probably put it in center as well. But what would happen if I were to make this into scale? This is exactly what would happen. It would sort of clash and it would scale according to the percentage. But I don't want that. So let me keep this in center as well. Then what I've done is I've basically created a rectangle at the back where I've put the same image poster, a gradient, and then I think there's one more layer on top of it, right? So there's a gradient layer from the bottom, and then you have a scrim. This is called a scrim, like a blanket, like a dark blanket, but at like a 50-60% opacity. And this entire thing is at left and right. So as I move away, you can obviously see that this works. But now obviously after a specific width, you'd have to enter iPad, right? Like no iPhone looks like this. So at that point, I will switch to adaptive design and see what is happening right here. Check this out. Check this out. This is very, very important. Why did this happen? Because my nested constraints are messed up. So let's see what is happening right here. If I were to go to my cellular connection and these things right here, you would realize that it says scale. Okay. Now I can't make any changes to this because this is an instance. So let me detach it. Okay. I will go to cellular connection, select all of these. Okay. First of all, make them normal. This is how they would look normally, and see what is happening right here. See the behavior because they're at scale. So they feel that if my mobile width is expanding, then I also need to sort of expand in width. So I should probably make this into right because they don't need to scale. They just have to stick to the right side. I will take this again and put this on left, and now they are working flawlessly, right? So this is how the behavior would work in. Now, folks, the important thing to note is that amongst iPad, you have responsiveness, but once I go from phone to iPad, it will be a separate set of components. So even in this case, you have the image, which is left to right and top to bottom. Why? So that as I expand, it sort of follows around, right? And then you have all of these things which are towards the right side because I want them to be tied to the right side. So the image is also left and right. This is also image right. That is why, this distance sort of remains the same. And then you have your desktop. So the elements remain the same, but at one point this would sort of break. So maybe we will add one more breakpoint. So this is called a breakpoint where you say that, maybe I don't want the same design. Maybe at some point it should just be different. So yeah, I just want to quickly go through how constraints would have been added for all of these three screens. Some important things to note, we've already covered that you will need different components for different devices. But when you're designing for a web, please make sure you start with the smallest canvas. You have to start with a width of 1280 pixels. When it comes to iOS, please make sure you start from iPhone 8 probably, because it's just very, very simple to go from a smaller canvas to a big canvas when it comes to responsiveness, but going from a big canvas to a small canvas becomes very, very tough. So I usually test my web designs on 1280, 1440 and 1920, and beyond 1920 I don't do anything which is responsive. I literally just put like white spaces on left and right, and that is what I would recommend you to do as well. So with that, we finally come to module number 3, where I just want to show off some very, very cool plugins. And the first plugin that I want to show off is called Responsify. Now, there are 2 plugins that I want to show. First one, I will show it in front of you, but eventually you will have to check out the second plugin on your own because I want you to do some homework as well. So folks, the thing is that in this case, you can obviously check out the constraints and all of these things, but what if I want one single frame being tested towards multiple sizes? So right now, manually, if I had to check how this would look on the MacBook Pro, how it would look on a desktop, all of these things, I would have to sort of duplicate it and then stretch it one by one, right? But with Responsify, all you need to do is go to this icon right here, go to plugins and just type the word Responsify, and you will find it right here. As soon as you install it, you do command slash and type responsify, and then they have all of these different devices. As soon as I click on say desktop, what it would do is it would test my entire design for a generic desktop, for a MacBook, for a MacBook Pro, for a Surface Book, and for an iMac. And you can do this for phones as well. So let's just say I take this frame out here and run the Responsify plugin again, and probably go and do it for Android. It would show me how the same pixel size would sort of get messed up if I were to make this on Google Pixel and Pixel XL. Now there's another concept right here that we need to understand, and that is of independent pixels versus dependent pixels, which is the concept of SP and DP, but we will not cover that in this course because this course is not a UX design course. This is a Figma course. So I won't get into those details, but it's just a very, very powerful plugin. And what I would recommend you to do is to install the untitled UI, file or any file from Figma community and start playing around, how they have created all of these things. In some cases, you will find instances, so you can detach those instances. And there's one very, very important video that you have to check out on Figma's YouTube channel. It's called Quick Responsive Workflows. And trust me when I say this, we had actually created a video back then. This is around 2.5 years ago, on this plugin called Responsify, Responsify is what we did right now. I think it was called Responsive plugin. And that allowed you to simulate multiple devices. Like it could actually allow you to have adaptive design inside Figma, because right now in a Figma frame, you can do responsiveness very easily. But with these plugins, you can do adaptiveness. That is, as you stretch from this frame to this frame, it would automatically switch from the mobile design to the web design to the tablet design and so forth. Like crazy powerful stuff. And so this is in your homework. Once you do it, you will just go crazy. Now, there are some specific things that I want to discuss. One is that this is a normal frame, right? But now Figma has also introduced this thing called as a section. And what is a section? I can literally create a boundary like this. And let's just say I keep these designs right here. Okay. And when you are creating designs in a design team, some designs are work in progress while some designs are ready to be developed. So if you click on the section, they have this small icon right here. If you mark this, then it will be ready for dev. So when your developers come to this file, they will instantly know that in this section are all the final Figma files. So it's just a way to, sort of quickly do a handoff. If you have limited pages, you can organize your files using sections. So now you have one more layer of organization. You have sections. Within sections, you have frames. Then within frames, you have all of your components, right? Another very important thing that I want to introduce is that when you are designing, folks, please make a component that looks like this. So I call it as a header component, where you have a subtext and a headline. So basically what I do is anytime I'm creating my files or I'm creating like inspiration, I organize all of my research, right? So if you were to see all of our redesign files, all of our redesign videos on YouTube, you would realize that Ansh keeps everything very, very organized. So this is also a frame, right? It has constraints. So you can always have it in different colors, maybe white for research, black for prototyping. So you can make one component and then, change the colors one by one, just make sure that it is accessible. And it's just very, very helpful. So I just wanted to introduce you to this practice. I had also written a Medium article. If you go to Medium and type Ansh Mehra, there I've written an article that says how to organize your Figma files using headers. I would strongly recommend you to do that. And hold spacebar for bypassing this. We've already done that. If I were to randomly sort of stretch, then the constraints would follow. But if I were to hold the command key, it would just bypass the constraints. Also, if you're sharing your design files, instead of going to the URL, you can select any frame and do Command L, and it would directly come to the top URL, and then you can just do Command C. Though you don't have to go to share and copy link and do all of that. Just do Command L and Command C, and boom, you are done. Right? There's also the outline mode. So if you press Command Y, you will enter an outline mode, and then you can see every single frame and auto layout sort of mapped out, right? Because look at the difference. If I'm not in my outline mode, everything looks like it's in a single layer. But once I enter outline mode, then you can see that this is an auto layout, this is an auto layout, there's auto layouts within auto layouts. So you can genuinely see the structure. Nested framing I've already done. I would recommend you to create an annotation card for yourself. So what is an annotation card? It is essentially like this comment card, which has a dynamic height. So width, I keep it static, but then have your DP, have your name, and then what you can do is you can have different colors for this. One can be for feedback, one can be for comments, one can be for an important note. Because I'm not a very big fan of Figma comments in general. I really like when me and my team are brainstorming using these annotation cards, and they will really help you. So these are the two components that I would strongly recommend you to make them on your own. Of course, I will be releasing this on the Figma community as well, so you can always copy the same components, but you will not really learn if you just start copying things blindly. Now, while you are pursuing this Figma course, you will need a lot of inspiration for UI and web design as you practice. So, I won't waste time going through all of these URLs. I've literally just compiled all of my top rated inspiration websites right here. So you can just take a screenshot and go through them one by one. I have also shortlisted 4 links that you can use to learn Figma on your own in case you don't want to wait for our videos and you want to do this upskilling, more detailed upskilling, more advanced upskilling. Then these 4 websites will really help you. Shortcuts.design right here is actually not just for Figma, but they have a list of all the crazy tools, design tools in the market, and they have sort of curated all of these shortcuts one by one. So it's crazy the amount of time you can save if you use these resources properly. In fact, folks, if you're here for the first time, we have created so many courses on UX breakdowns, on designing your first app, on UI redesigns, basics of UX, basics of UI. I've also created a course on spatial design as well. So there's a lot to learn, and we have compiled all of this information on this new platform of ours. It's called learnuiux.in, where I will be releasing information about my meetups, my community events, our paid cohorts, our paid mentorship plans. But I personally believe that I want to first sort of set the base for beginners who don't have that much of spending capacity. See, I won't say that I'm some sort of a saint that doesn't want to make money and doesn't want to sell courses. I want to do that. It's just that when I see so many students struggling with just basics, I've sort of realized that there's a lot of basics to be taught for free. So I would recommend you folks to, learn these basics from free. LearnUIUX.in has a complete roadmap for, planning your UX design career from 0 to 100. We have a very important video on our YouTube channel called the Roadmap Video, 2023 Roadmap for a UX Design Career. Apart from our Figma course, we also have a 15-episode course on UX design, which is Foundations of UX Design, because right now you're learning the tool. But if you want to learn the subject, then you should check out the 15-episode course that we have in both Hindi and in English. And all of the resources that you see will be in the description. And trust me, folks, just to learn Figma and UX, you need at least 6 to 8 months. So please don't expect miracles out of this. I hope that you saw the first episode as well. Please make sure that you're consistent. And if you feel that you've already done Figma and all of your basics of UX and you want to learn case studies and you want to, start applying for companies, then we have made 2 very valuable videos on writing your UX case studies. These are 2 videos, highly detailed. I'm sure you will learn a lot. Now, before we end this video, it is very important that you know your homework for the next 5 days, and I will be waiting for your homework. I will be waiting for your stories and LinkedIn posts to see how many people are actually documenting their learnings. First of all, let me know in the comment section what I should cover next. By the way, let me just show you the syllabus. I will be covering styles and libraries in the next video. Components is in the 4th. At any point, if you want me to cover anything throughout the course, just let me know. And if there was anything that you feel wasn't covered in frames and auto layouts, you can still mention it in the comment section and I will make sure that I cover it in the entirety of the course. Let me know if you want me to create more such in detail videos, because to be honest, my entire throat is so tired of talking. I actually record videos of like 2 hours or so, and we sort of edit it down to make it very crisp. So it is so much of effort and hard work, folks, that it gets too overwhelming at times. But I know that students really need this. So I would really appreciate if you would just comment your feedback, because when you comment, YouTube gets to know that this content is working. So make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon and share it amongst your design communities and friends. And please make detailed notes on Notion. If you don't document your learnings, you will forget it. Please make sure you watch the quick responsive workflows video that I had recommended. That video is a game changer. You will go crazy when you see that 5-minute video. Go through at least 3 UI resources and try to recreate something. I think now you have some understanding of Figma in general, and you would have obviously been upskilling yourself. So just explore any three of these, and I'm telling you, you will find a lot of inspiration. And document your learnings on LinkedIn and tag me. I would love to see your notes. I would love to see that you guys are actually making use of these homeworks. And yes, coming back to our syllabus, we are done with the first two lectures, and in lecture number 3 we will cover styles and libraries, which includes your color styles, your type styles, declaring libraries. So libraries are not available in the free plan, so you will need the pro plan for this. And if you want to get more information, you can always check out learnuiux.in. I hope this lecture made sense. I know I have covered a lot of things in one single video, but it's very important to keep these videos very dense. This entire course is for really serious learners. I'm pretty sure there's a lot to learn within Autolayout, because we haven't really covered detailed use cases of auto layouts, right? So that is something that I'm planning to cover in the components video. But again, I would really recommend if you can add in the comments about specific stuff that you would want me to cover, because I really want to make sure that this one single series of 10 lectures becomes the top tier of Figma education on the internet. Like, I want this course to be absolutely timeless, and it is not possible unless I get your honest feedback. And looking forward to your stories. I always love when you guys put in those stories and you tag me and I can see your notes. It's very fulfilling for me to see that so many students are learning Figma, and a lot of exciting videos are in the pipeline, folks. I am very excited about it. If you're into video editing or into Instagram script writing, you can always email me your work on admin@anshmera.com. We're looking to expand our team. So if you're in the content creation world and if you have really solid experience as a designer or an editor, I would love to see your work. And yes, with that being said, I hope that you're taking care of your mind and body. This is your dost Ansh Mehra signing out. If you like this video, make sure you click on like and hit the subscribe button. I regularly upload videos on UX design, marketing, and storytelling.